Hello and welcome to Eye Openers. Thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you, Anders, for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And even though it may be 100 degrees in Santa Barbara, I'm drinking coffee because that's what I do. But at Handlebar, this is where they give you the iced coffee in a hot coffee cup. So it might look like I have hot coffee, but I'm iced today. Which we don't get very much of here in Santa Barbara because it's usually cool at either ends of the day. So I'm still drinking hot coffee. But today really called for an iced coffee day. How about you?
I think that's a good adaptation to a changing environment. It is literally 100 degrees. And so while I intended to have a cup of coffee, instead I'm drinking a well-insulated bucket of cold water.
I love that because
I'm literally in my backyard in 100 degree weather.
Well, thank you for making it work. The show stops for no one. The show must go on.
Sure.
So thanks for being here. But I have a rule where I usually don't drink coffee after 12. I talk about it sometimes on the show. As insightful as I sometimes find caffeine to be, too much caffeine can be not a good thing for me. And so I try to stop drinking caffeine 10 hours before I go to sleep. So I've talked about the 10-3-2-1-0 rule. Have I shared this with you? No,
but this is exactly how I know you're not Swedish. No such rule exists with me.
No, so you're Swedish. So tell us, what's the rule in Sweden?
Well, my grandmother used to say, if it's cold outside, have a cup of coffee, it'll warm you up. And if it's hot outside, have a cup of coffee, it'll cool you down. The Swedes have this wonderful tradition called fika, it's literally afternoon coffee. And in neighborhoods in Sweden, and even in bedroom communities like where my family immigrated to, it literally means wandering around and visiting your friends in their homes for pastries and coffee in the afternoon. And so if you're curious about a wonderful coffee culture, look up fika. It's really wonderful.
I love that. We might just now look for Swedish guests just so we can do fika with them. I love this. Okay. Well, there's so much culture around coffee. And because we talk about organizational culture and we talk about how to derive insights from other people's experiences, it's so natural that coffee is just part of the equation. So
things we all agree on. Coffee and olive oil.
Yes, totally.
What else is that?
But besides being Swedish, there are other reasons why we have you on the show today. So I want the audience to totally understand why they should be tuning in and why they should be paying attention to something you might have to say today. So allow me to read your formal bio and we'll let you expand upon it. But Anders, you just completed a 20-year run at Deckers Brands, which is one of the most dynamic and powerful companies in the world of footwear and consumer brands, broadly speaking. Over the course of that time, you grew from an entry-level marketing coordinator through senior leadership roles in strategy and consumer insights. And it culminated in your most recent post as the VP and global GM of the Teva footwear brand. Tell us a little bit more, because it's not, I would say in this day and age in 2024, people don't stay at companies for 21 years. Certainly people who would identify as millennials, and going from entry level to a GM or a VP position at the same company is also incredibly rare. So folks, we have a unicorn with us today. Please share more.
Well, thank you. And I would also like to adjust the record. Identify as a millennial. I was born in 1977, so I can neither identify nor claim to be a millennial. But thank you.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think that's what's the cutoff. What's the official cutoff? Is it 80?
1980. So I was,
Okay.
I'm nearly 50, so I don't know. That feels like a bridge too far.
All right.
Yeah. So my experience recently is an unusual one. I think that's true, and I think it speaks to the power of timing, circumstance, and attitude. I worked at Deckers for 21 years, and in reality, though, over the course of those 21 years, it was probably 4 or 5 different companies. When I started, that company was $99 million of total revenue, and when I finished, that was the size of the Teva U.S. wholesale business, and the company has in its entirety was north of 4 billion. So, I like to think that I was sort of like the Forrest Gump of Deckers, just there for these turning points in evolution and evolutionary moments where, the lightning struck and the things moved and the ground separated, and then we were over here. And I got to see and learn so much about not only what the factors that create success are, but also a little bit of what not to do, and a little bit of how maybe the best laid plans often don't come to fruition. But sometimes if you're in the right place at the right time, you can experience an incredible wave.
Great. Well, let's talk about some of those moments. When you and I were having our pre-call to kind of shape what might be the most important stories we could tell on today's podcast, you said something that really got my attention. And you said, leadership has nothing to do with skill and everything to do with sitting with accountability.
Yeah. I mean, I got to see so many people express their leadership in tough moments, in moments of triumph. And the thing that unites all of the great ones is fearless acceptance of accountability for their and others' actions. And to stand up in front of people and say, we may win, we may not, but I'm here to take accountability for whatever happens. And that, I think, is I think it's a common trait of great leaders. To say, listen, I can't guarantee that everything's going to be okay, right? We can't control the weather. We can't control the economy. But what I can do is give you the reassurance that I'm accountable for whatever happens at the end of this journey. And, I heard a story recently about Dwight Eisenhower, who a perfect example of this. On the eve of the D-Day invasion of Normandy, he wrote 2 letters. One, claiming the operation was a success and giving the credit to the GIs who fought their way off the beaches and started to retake continental Europe for the Allies. And the second letter, declaring it a failure and taking full responsibility himself singularly. And I think that's why, Eisenhower is such a wonderful lesson in humility and accountability, because he was willing to say, listen, if we win, it was you. If we lose, it was me. And that really resonates with me. And I saw leaders really excel by leading teams and galvanizing people, drawing people together, creating alignment, a shared understanding of what we need to do and how we need to do it, by simply saying, I trust you. And if it doesn't work, it's me.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. That's something I talk about with the people I work with all the time, that, you need to really share credit, but take full responsibility. And that's what you're outlining really well in that story. I think that it's easy to do when things are going well, right? You guys have a big win. It's awesome. My team, they're amazing. It's harder to do when things are not going well and there's pressures and it's stressful. Can you tell us a story about when you had to live through that, when times were hard and it's hard to step in and take that accountability? Yeah.
I mean, those of us who were leading businesses after the 13th of March, 2020, especially businesses that were global, complex, with supply chains
right
on the other side of the world, with distribution centers that had padlocks on the doors, that was a crash course. And that was a moment where you realize that there's only so many things you can control, right? So there's only so many facets of your business, success and otherwise, right? You can be successful accidentally too. And believe me, I have been in a number of different ways. And I think the transition into what it is like to lead a team after and during, through, and after the pandemic is, quite frankly, it's a complete leadership culture shift. I don't think anybody should or could even be operating the same way. In fact, I don't even know if you could remember how you operated on March 11th, 2020. I'd be curious. Do you even remember? I cannot remember what it was like. In fact, it seems like a dream, like a faint dream.
Yeah.
And the adjustment to this, it was really has to do with the presence and how you manage control and trust with your organization. And as you leave this environment where you can you can observe. I spent a lot of time before the pandemic. I would walk the floor and just see how everybody was doing. Make chit chat. I learned that trick from my friend Zohar Ziv. You walk the floor, check in with people, pat them on the back, see what's going on. But the whole while, I'm like, just what's the temperature out here? Like, how's everybody doing? That toolkit just evaporated. And I had a really hard time not understanding how my team was doing. Everybody was overloaded. But how's everybody doing? And it really drove me nuts. And it put me into a real funk as a leader, because I lost what I considered to be like my toolkit. And the insight is quite simply this. Like, I think I was operating under a perspective, or at least a philosophy of leadership, which is we have a lot to do. We have competitors out there that are doing it. It's this kind of like, and what are you all doing? How are you all doing it such that we will have the greatest chance of success? And coming home, I'm in my garage here. This was where I worked, still work.
Right.
When we split apart, it shifted the prioritization, which it became less about, hey, what are you doing for me? And I had to learn this the hard way. Again, I had to go to therapy to figure this out. to learn that no, the question is not what can you do for me? It's what do you need from me?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get at what I had before, which was understanding what those team members needed from me helped me to facilitate their path to success. Whether it's being more clear, whether it's a reallocation of resources, whether it's helping to clear the way with another department. Like, my job changed fundamentally. And it took me quite a few months to figure that out. Yeah. And I, sat in here 12 hours a day, sweating it out for several months until I realized, okay, no, now more than ever, it is my job to support what's going on out there in the front line of the business.
Right. I have an episode that has gone viral for us on Eye Openers with a gentleman named Roy Ballantyne who runs a family office, and he was one of the first people who highlighted that in the pandemic time on this podcast, that this true servant leadership and changing your mindset from they work for me to I work for them really just changed everything. And we had so many people commenting on it, like how that was just such an eye-opening moment for them, this concept of flipping that power dynamic. And for leaders to think about, you can be the vehicle that unlocks potential and possibility for other members of this organization, but you need to show up in service of them. And so when that clicked for you, what were some of the actual things you did, the action steps that allowed you to be that support and unlock that for them?
The most important one was to put exponentially more pressure on my own clarity as a communicator and as a leader. Because in the previous world, you could be a little vague, a little cliche. Let's get after it. And then people go, oh, well, there he goes again. And then they go back to their desk. And then a half hour later, they can ask you a question and you can clarify whatever. It came to me that when I sat at this desk talking on, godforsaken Microsoft Teams, and I gave a direction, that direction was chiseled in a stone tablet. So the words, the context, the reasons for and against, all were critical to handing my team or whomever was on the call. It could have been someone else from, anywhere, The pressure on the clarity went through the roof because you could not get away with being vague anymore. And I don't think, quite frankly, I don't think any leaders should ever get away with being vague. It's disrespectful to your team, because if you're giving this cliched stuff and they don't know what to do, what's going to happen, right? They're going to guess and they might be wrong.
Right.
It comes back to accountability. Whose fault was that?
Right. How do you check in for clarity on your communication? You know, I have a lot of people who I work with that are working on this, really high level leaders. I think it's just constantly a work in progress for so many of us. How did you get like either confirmation that you were delivering clear directives, that it was landing, resonating?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's sort of an internal and external way, right? Internally, I think a leader must be an obsessive about language, and know that the small difference between words can really throw people off if you're not measured and precise and thoughtful about your language. Because a lot of what you say ends up on a PowerPoint slide, or it ends up in a briefing document, or it ends up in a earnings report, right? And like my words would end up in earnings reports to Wall Street, right? And so the words that are selected have real meaning. And this was one of those predispositions that I have, because my mother is a writer, was an English teacher, and she had a Mark Twain quote on her classroom wall that said, "The difference between the right word and nearly the right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug." And I believe that really, really intently. I also think you have to be extremely humble and assume that what you intend is not getting through, and then ask for feedback. So we kept a nice tight group of leaders and sort of functional leaders on the business, and every Monday we would go through what's happening, what are some of the questions arising, and if we're moving toward a deployment of a strategy, we would beat up the language and say, hey, are we saying this the right way, such that somebody in Japan or somebody in Denmark will understand it and be able to act against it. And I think that obsession over, are we saying this the right way, really served us well.
Right. Well, that's a really, really cool like juxtaposition to think, yes, how does this literally translate? Like, how can people literally interpret this and use it? But I think it's the same, even if you are actually speaking the same language, that it doesn't always land. And I have so many executives that I work with that are constantly surprised by the fact that they need to repeat themselves. And I liken it to parenting. Like, I think I told my kid 10 times to put their shoes on this morning.
Yeah.
And they like me and they're motivated to go to school.
And they speak English.
And they speak the same language. But there's still, we still need to have that repetition sometimes. And I try to prepare people for that. But, can you share an example of maybe when this didn't go well? Like, was there ever a situation that you went through where a message didn't land, or something was misinterpreted, or there was some kind of miscommunication that had impact? And how do you manage that, and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, I'll tell a funny one. But funny, interesting funny.
Okay.
This dates back to this was about 2008, 2007 maybe, and we were at that point I was the head of marketing for the UGG brand, and UGG had got to somewhere around $500 million, and we're finally starting to research the business and research consumers, and there was. Do
you remember what year that was?
I think it was 2007. Yeah, 2007 or 2008.
Yes, of course it was, because that's when all my friends and I were wearing UGG boots with denim mini skirts. And
see, what you're describing is really 2004, and I was there for that too. Like I said, Forrest Gump. I was Forrest Gump. But we had an assumption of understanding, because the business was great. Look how well people understand us. This business is growing. It's booming. We can't do anything wrong, right? we had there's a bit of language that was used at the time, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but the tag, the hook at the end was comfort and luxury, right? Kind of makes some sense, right? with the UGG brand, well, we were testing language in Japanese focus groups, and we had asked that our team translate. And the Japanese have multiple alphabets, and the one most effective at delivering concepts is kanji, which are Chinese characters that are in whatever. So they deploy that in a kind of a stylized way. But the translation of luxury that made sense for them in their culture, the word that made most sense actually translated to shiny, which is the polar opposite of what you would associate with a classic short or a classic tall or a coquette slipper or something. It's polar opposite. And so I'm sitting in the back room, this focus group, and I'm listening to all these consumers talk about how this doesn't make any sense. Like, what are these people talking about? And I'm like, but we've been successful. So in spite of success, we managed to confuse the living daylights out of an entire country. And only through asking questions and getting feedback from consumers, we go, maybe we need to rethink the language here.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story. It just completely illustrates like how you might miss a mark. But if you weren't checking in about it, if you guys didn't do the focus group and you just launched because it had been successful everywhere else, right, you wouldn't understand why the sales were falling flat.
Yeah, or we would be successful in spite of our efforts, not because of it. And nobody wants that.
Right. And then you wouldn't truly understand the causation, wouldn't be able to drive business thereafter.
Nor would you be able to replicate it.
Right. You and I have something else in common. We absolutely love to play sports.
Oh.
And we have talked offline, but now let's talk online about the similarities we see in competitive sports and the marketplace, in leadership, right? And how we show up and how we work with people, how this motivates teams. And I think you have also a unique perspective there. If you want to share some of your philosophy on how this carries over.
I mean, of course. I mean, I'm sure everybody or most of the people listening can relate to having a coach at whatever level you are. I mean, whether you are, a childhood athlete or played all the way through college or even perhaps professionally. I had the incredible honor to work directly for Wendy Yang, who was a professional tennis player for several years, like many years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. No, learned a lot about accountability from a singles, professional WTA singles tennis player.
That's awesome.
But athletics it's not a surprise to me that you see like so many college athletes end up becoming CEOs and founders of companies, and it's especially women. It's an amazing pattern, and I think it's something that we should probably all pay really close attention to, especially as we're considering the role of athletics in our children's lives. And but the role of coaching, to me, you and I had a discussion about this, because to me, like, coaches are like step down from God. They're in Mount Olympus for me, and my coaches in whatever sport I was playing at the time are still some of the most important developmental influences in my life as a leader. My high school volleyball coach, Roy Verduzco, is the most winning boys volleyball coach in the country. He held really high standards for off the court conduct. So for his rule was, right before you step in this gym, your hat is off, your shirt is tucked in, your shoes are tied. And if any one person missed that instruction, we were all running, and it hurt, right? It seems like a small thing, but what he did was he set the tone. And the tone was accountability. You are accountable for yourself when you set your foot in here. And he was very clear. This is the rule. And once a year, someone would screw up, and then we would all, whatever.
But I also love, like, that's team accountability as well. Like, I'm responsible for myself, but I also have an impact on the whole group.
Yep.
However I show up. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a really clear one. And, so my wife played college soccer at University of Colorado. So you and Kendall have a lot in common there.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about what made a successful women's coach. And she was like, I learned so much from her, because she had great coaches and less great coaches. And I took a lesson from her in this that I will apply for the rest of my career, which is, women and men respond differently to different kinds of inputs, and especially coaching, right?
Sure.
The lesson I learned is her great coaches went out of the way to make them comfortable. That doesn't mean letting them off the hook, but they had to be calm and comfortable, because nobody can excel when they're nervous. And you think about, you're a tennis player, right? Like, what happens if your arm is tense, right?
Yeah.
Not only do you suck, you get hurt, right? So I like this metaphor for everything, because nobody does the best work when they're nervous. And I think there's a generational shift in leadership here, where you have the sort of Jack Welch 1980s and 1990s kind of pound the desk. Those guys are dying off because, quite frankly, they didn't work. They made people nervous. They made people fearful. They operated in a way that created cultures of tension. And I love this lesson from sport, which is you can't be good if you're tense. You will underperform. And so that was a first principle for me. And this came directly from athletics. How do I create a moment of calm and relaxation in this team so that they're ready to go, and when they need to act, they're free and they're fluid and they're not tense, they're not tight. That all comes from the leader. And I think the leader casts a long shadow. So if you're there making people nervous, although you may think that you're a tough guy in charge, you're actually making yourself less effective.
Such an important point. And so in my work, we call that psychological safety. And when I first introduced that concept, CEOs hate it. Like, they think that it means like tolerance of poor performance and, no accountability and whatever. I say absolutely the opposite. Because when we can create an environment where people feel comfortable challenging, where they feel comfortable giving the feedback, confronting maybe the person up top, that's truly when we drive innovation. It's when we are able to reach the next levels of our performance, right? Not through being feared, not through, pounding the desk, but when it's safe for people to fully embody like all of their creativity, all of their ideas, expression, all the ways in which they want to give feedback to others that isn't maybe linear, right? Like, who gives feedback to their boss? That's not often the case. But when we can create an environment like that, so much becomes possible.
Yeah, agreed. And 9 out of 10 bosses would love that, right? But maybe only a few people are courageous enough to do it, unless you build a culture or an environment that allows it, normalizes it.
Right. I've even seen recently through like recognition systems where we're giving praise to people through tools like Assembly or other culture driving type tools, where they're getting points for giving skip level feedback. I think this is the coolest thing. Like, we're actually rewarding and gamifying this concept in a way that it encourages the employee to do so. Right. And then coaching behind the scenes to help how is that feedback being received, and how are we talking about it in front of our teams and thanking them for it.
Yeah, whatever it takes. I might look at this like, that sounds like a great solution. The fundamental, the first principle that comes up for me again is that of relationships. If you think about like the relationships you have at work or professional relationships, and compare them with the relationship you have with your best friend or with your spouse or with just people who you trust and you have like this really nice level relationship with, they're not that similar, but they should be more similar. And so I think if there's sort of another first principle is like, what can you do to build a relationship? And part of that is accepting the feedback without, my best friend, gives me feedback all the time. I don't ask him for it, but he's generous.
What a good friend.
He's the best. Yeah. But I think the point is like it's like respect and fear sort of live in the same universe, right? And if you have a relationship in which respect is shared, you're going to learn more about yourself and that other person than you can possibly imagine. And so it's also one of the reasons why I worked at Deckers for 21 years. I just had relationships that I just cherished, and still do. I mean, I just don't work there anymore. But I still do have those relationships, and I think that really goes a long way.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. You bring up something really important, and I thought of two things, and we'll see which one resonates more, where we could go with that. That giving the feedback, while it might be challenging, is actually the most loving thing we could do. It's the most respectful thing we could do, because a lot of people think the opposite of love is hate. The opposite of love is apathy. Like indifference. Yeah, right. Indifference. Like if we really care, like we either like love or we hating someone is actually like really caring about something. If you don't care at all, right, you don't care enough to invest and to give that feedback. And that's a signal. That should be a signal to you as the leader, or you as, the team member who's not getting that feedback, and to ask those questions. So that came up for me in thinking about what you were saying. And then another thought was, who do you have to be as the leader to be able to receive that kind of critical feedback? Because I think we're talking about how do you show up on a personal level in regards to humility, ego, like being receptive to that. Like I think about the general public, and I can tell you a million stories about when I was doing like therapy in a private practice and how challenging this is for your everyday person. How do leaders move through that? How do they become the kind of person who can be receptive, and then not only be receptive, but integrate it and be better?
I mean, that's $1 million question, maybe more. It's just accept that it's really hard and that you're going to be imperfect, because it is a process of self-discovery and confidence and self-awareness. And I think you have to roll the clock back a bit. Certainly for me, if I got close to that sort of humble leader thing, it's because I had people to look up to who also could do it. And, I mentioned Wendy earlier, but I also had worked for Jessica Buttimer, people who could be incredibly sharp, incredibly strategic, but also relatable to others. And, the question about like career development, it's endless. And I totally understand why. It's super scary. Like, how do you know you're doing the right thing? And I always say there's just two things you have to do. You have to be curious about something in the business, and you have to know what that is, or be willing to like write down, what am I curious about? I'm curious about supply chain. I'm curious about sourcing, like curious about how systems and like sales. Whatever, doesn't matter. Like, what are you curious about, such that you can follow it with genuine, authentic interest? And the most important thing is to find somebody you want to be like when you grow up. Just one person, and watch them intently. And that approach, that was how I was. And that's I learned from really phenomenal. I've already mentioned Zohar. I have these people that I like learned how to relate your own experience and knowledge and expertise. And yeah, you can be great at something, but if you're unworkable or you're incomprehensible, you're not going to go anywhere. And so I always gravitated toward these leaders who were very humble, big personalities, but really magnetic, and people would draw people in. I was really moved by that. And so finding someone you want to be like when you grow up may sound kind of like like a high school guidance counselor poster or something, but you'll never stop finding benefit from that perspective.
I love that. That's such a great reminder that even in 2024, a great mentor, whether that's formal or informal, an advocate, these things can be so helpful in showing us a path. Great.
Yeah. And I mean, my last year at Deckers, I was mentoring 5 or 6 young people in the organization. It was the highlight of my year.
Right. And that's what a powerful place when you realize you've imbibed so much that now you get to give back.
Yeah. And I think there's this concept of what do they call it? Reverse mentorship. something,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of funny. If you're mentoring someone and you're really listening to them, it goes both ways. It 100% goes both ways. And I'll name check another one. A gentleman named Andrew Brown. He was my mentee for a year and a half or so, and he asked me this great question because he was sort of coming of age in his career, kind of during and kind of after the pandemic. So he didn't have the experience that I had in the office for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
That he asked me this question. He goes, "What am I missing out on?
Mm.
What am I not getting out of this experience that you got?" And I like, what? And through the discussion about what was he missing that I had,
Yeah,
he went and created an employee resource group for people in the first few years of their career who don't have in-person culture, who don't have happy hours, who don't have business travel and trade shows and all this stuff that galvanized people together. And I learned a hell of a lot about, there's a lot going on in my organization that I need to be more sensitive to, because
mm-hmm.
there's an experience that I had that none of these people have had. And
Wow.
that was a real eye opener. So thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, really cool point. I love that. This concept, right, of that we can always be learning. And in fact, I find like the most successful leaders are the ones that constantly have that growth mindset. They recognize that they're a student of life, and that there's so much to be learned and garnered from everywhere. We just have to be open to it, which I think just brings us back to that idea of like showing up with less ego, more humility, and being open to what's in front of you. Just such an important, I guess, concept or just principle to live with.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. If there's one thing I would impart is like being open to what's in front of you and changing in front of you should make us all very skeptical of the plans that we make.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's okay to do it, right? It's okay. You should do it, right? But being prepared is infinitely more valuable than having a plan for something.
Right.
Infinitely more valuable.
Right. It's so important to recognize the nuance in that the exercise of planning is incredibly valuable to be prepared. But the physical plan itself, you need to still be flexible with, and you need to adapt and show up as necessary. Well, I love chatting with you. I mean, you and I can go on and on for hours. And in fact, I think we might, because I think we only hit like a third of the things we said we were going to talk about. And we said, hey, wouldn't this be a cool series to chat about your journey, how others might learn from it, whether you're in the corporate kind of executive space, or whether you're in a small business, how do you navigate this changing landscape? And there's just so many lessons to be learned here. So I want to say thank you for joining us, but I think we're going to see you soon.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You also might be in a garage in Santa Barbara where it's 113 degrees.
So you just always be learning. How can you adapt, right?
I've never done this before. I may never do it again. But,
right. Hopefully on a day that it's cooler. So we'll try to plan it around the weather for you. But can't thank you enough. I really, something I found so valuable is just, recognizing that there's just so many opportunities to learn and how to stay open to those. And I loved your reverse mentorship concept there at the end. So I'm certain that when we post this and share this, so wherever you're seeing this podcast, whether it's this live recording now or it's post-production, please leave a comment. Let us know what stories really resonated with you, what maybe you want to hear more about, and we can work that into the next show. And also any kind of stories or questions you want to ask or tell Anders, and we can shape response to it. So thank you guys so much for engaging and being a true part of the show. It's what makes it even better for you guys as an audience. So for today, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you, Anders, for being here. And until next time, keep an open mind like we learned today, and look for those eye-opening moments to improve your leadership and drive your business. Thank you, everyone.